And Pam, I do want to be mindful of your time and everybody's time that's on the call this morning with us. So we can go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all for joining us today for this month's professional development event. We do have Pamela Brooks joining us this morning. I'll let Pam go ahead and do a quick introduction of herself. But as you can see by the slide here, we'll be getting into braving trust and kind of talking with Pam about what that means and Brené Brown's piece on that.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. I am on with you from Massachusetts, so I'm enjoying all the fall colors right now, which is kind of fun. And I get to talk today on one of two of my favorite topics from Brené. One is braving trust. The other one has to do with her whole conversation on vulnerability and how to have better, tougher conversations. But this one with braving trust resonated with me from a long time ago. I taught out at Poly for probably 8+ years. And then people who knew me said, Pam, we need you on inside. We need you to work, with other people and ASU. And I was like, what does that look like? And then, of course, in LinkedIn, I get this notice that says there's this OD consulting position open in leadership and workforce development. I looked at the thing and I go, I could do that job. And I applied and I got that job. So I have been working in a development position within ASU now for about 6 years, 7 years, something like that. Time flies when you're having fun. And when my husband took a job out here, I had been working with the Fulton Schools of Engineering and William P. Carey. And I said, well, they said, we need a person to develop our leadership. I said, well, you can hire me. I can do it from anywhere. So I stayed on and I got a position within Fulton Schools and William P. Carey at the same time. So it was great. I was certified in Brené Brown back in 2019, but had been using her work for over 2 years. So it was a bucket list for me to meet her. How many on right now, raise your hands, have heard of Brené? I'm getting a few no's and some yeses. Okay. And it was interesting because Abby and I were talking when we first got on. Abby said I'd never heard of Brené before. So I just want to make sure that you guys get acquainted to who she is, and hopefully you'll understand the passion I have for her and be hooked on it as well, because she does an amazing job of researching what she does. She's down to earth and she gives very practical applications for, well, now that we know this, what do we do with it type thing. So let me jump in. This is actually one that I had worked up for the project management group and did this about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So I thought it was a great collection of some stuff. I've thrown in some other stuff to enhance also Brené's. So let me dive in here. While you take this workshop, the best way for you to remember information is to think of someone or a relationship that you would like to improve. And as I go through this information, if you go, oh God, that resonates in this relationship, you're going to remember it. And then hopefully you'll pick up some pointers so that when you're done with today, you won't just have, taken an hour of your day to do something, but you will improve your relationship. And this stuff works whether you're in work or out of work. In fact, when I've been teaching Dare to Lead, most of the people, when they finish, go, God, this was great material, but you know what? I think it helped me more in my relationships outside of work than it did in work. And then I have others that will take it and go, oh my God, this was perfect timing because I just had to go in and have this conversation and I was so much more prepared. So here we go. So I've been doing this work for years. I'm also certified by Judith Glazer in conversational intelligence, and we will skip all of that. I don't need that stuff there. The other thing is when we dive into doing anything, and it's one for me that I've really, I want to say tried to work hard on, but it's constant work. It's not that it ever comes easy, is to give yourself permission to be present for what you're doing. Because we live in a world of distractions. We live in a world that causes us a lot of times to think into the future. Oh my God, I got to get my car. I'm going to go to the airport. I got to do this because I got the meeting coming. Oh, I'm going to have this conversation. Like our brain is always jumping to the next thing instead of just being able to be here. So if you have something that's going on and you need to take it off, take a little sticky, write it down and put it to the side. And for some reason, it's like giving your brain permission to go, I'm not going to think about this right now because it's on the sticky and I will remember it after the meeting. So whenever I had a meeting with her, it was one of those that we would put these permission slips down. And this works if it's really big, like for me, it was a problem I had with my daughter. It can also work for little things, but it's a way to take our brain and go, that thing's going through my head, put it on paper, physically take it out, put it down. Great to do with teams as well for check-ins. All right. Key takeaways from our short session, and feel free to add to the chat if you have questions at any time, and we're small enough, feel free to unmute and go, whoa, that was really cool. And give me more information on that. Stop me. Okay. So please feel free. Again, because I know I have different levels of people with Brené. Some people are like, oh, no, I've heard that before. And other people go, no, that's a new concept for me. So please feel free to do that. I'm going to talk about why trust is hard. I want to talk about some of the neural components of trust, because I found in my work, it is so fascinating for us to understand the biology. And even Brené in her book talks about the biology of emotion, because it helps us, I want to say, to be a little more forgiving and compassionate to ourselves. So we're going to get that. I'm going to talk about some of the things that lead to distrust. And this is important because the things that lead to distrust are triggers for us that cause us to put up defense and walls, which cause the other person to put defense and walls. And pretty soon we have a cycle of distrust happening and we don't know why. And we can't put our finger on it, but we just, we just doing it. So, and the last thing, how do we rebuild it? So why is trust so flippin' hard? Well, it involves emotional well-being. So we will probably be more trusting if we trust ourselves. We will be more trusting when we're coming from a place of security. We will be more trusting depending on our past and our level of trust that we've had in other relationships. So there's just this potential that if we're doing well, we're going to be open. If we've been through a really rough relationship, maybe we were dating and something happened, emotionally, we're not in a great place, and we were probably going to just put up an element of distrust with others, right? So emotional well-being is important. It can also be situational. There may be times where, because of whatever our state is, we wouldn't extend trust. And other times it's like, yeah, whatever, like, we'll just open up. Okay. So sometimes a situation can cause us to feel like I shouldn't be trusting in this situation. And maybe in this one, again, because I feel comfortable, confident, I could be more trusting. It's also vulnerable. And so this is how Brené defines vulnerability. There's uncertainty, there's a potential for risk, and emotional exposure. So we are wired for belonging. And I think one of the greatest descriptors I heard of it was this gal that described it as the fact that we are porcupines. And we have this great need to cuddle up with other people because we get cold and we want to, be with someone. We have this need to belong. But every time we get a little close to get a little heat, we prick each other. And so then we have to move away. And then we move away and it's like, oh God, but I really want to get close to somebody. So we move close again and we prick each other and then we move away. And so we kind of go through this up and down of there's uncertainty, especially in new relationships. Do I put myself at risk? And she will say that trust is always built in small moments. And that's also coming from Gotten in his work on relationships. And so it is a stacking where I'm vulnerable, I expose myself, something positive happens. Ooh, I can trust him, and we'll go. And sometimes it can take one thing and it will crush our trust. And then we have to go back to stacking again. So anytime, uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure. And there's no way to go through life without being vulnerable. At some point, we will all face it and have difficulty with it, and then we'll have difficulty with it again. It's also determined by us as individuals. So I may go through something and go, well, that didn't leave me vulnerable, no problem. I can get up and speak with a crowd of people, and it's like, who cares? Why? Because I've done it a lot. Somebody else going into that same situation is like, oh man, that's like highly vulnerable. I'm putting myself out there. Like, there's no way I'm going to go do that, right? So it's very individual in terms of what we see. Even looking at this picture that I have up here, there's a bunch of people who have their hands on their head, which is usually some form of distress of some kind. But can we really read what they're thinking? I think about the guys like, over here in the corner, like, you can even see the eye squint. If I asked you all to type into the session, what is this guy feeling right now? We're going to get a bunch of different answers. Some people will go, oh, he's forgotten something, or he's frustrated, or he's maybe coming up on a migraine. My daughter used to put her hands on her head right before she got a migraine. But we don't know. We can read on the outside and we can generally understand frustration. But we can't understand what's causing that, what's under the iceberg to bring out that expression that we see. And so we literally neurologically have mirror neurons and we try to interpret the states of people. But a lot of times we create our own worst enemies because we create up the stories in our head for what we don't know. And then we act on those stories, which is usually I'm guarded because I'm not trusting. And so the story I make up is that you're going to do something that's really awful bad to me. And then I respond to you with the thought that you're going to do something really awful bad, which then you read my defensiveness. And then pretty soon we are in a negative spiral of trust. And the same is true trying to build back up. We see a little bit of trust, we add a little bit more, and then we can build it. So what we can break down, we can build up. But we have to understand, again, trust from ourselves and our own self-trust before we can look at others. And trust involves commitment between two people. And I think this is really, really important to understand. Because if I go, God, I really want to work on this relationship, I'm going to do some stuff to really try to build trust. And the other person goes, yeah, it's not going to happen. Because they're going to continue to do the little micro things that break the trust down. And it also creates an unsafe environment because that's usually almost like codependent. I'm doing everything and I'm doing all the work and the other person's taking advantage of it. So it's not a mutual relationship. So it does take commitment. And so the best part Brené will talk about as we get into this is boundaries. We have to work to set what is it that our expectations are so that we can know when we're in that safe relationship. So key transformation here. How do we make trust easier? Now, we have to create a safe space. When I do work with teams, sometimes I will start out by just having people, and you can do this if you want, type into the little box, especially in a Zoom session, because I have no way other than to see people blinking at a screen or their name on the screen in some cases. Where's everybody at? But we can at least check in and say, here's the two things that I'm at. And Brené does it with her team a lot. So for me, I would say there's a part of me that's a little tired because I just got back from vacation and I didn't sleep well on vacation, which was really sad because my husband had an allergy and was snoring, right? More information you need. But on the other hand, I'm also excited because we have a potential of getting a home. So mixed emotion, right? But we can put out there at least excited and tired. And now everybody around is going to get an idea what that is. And then we can also start to ask questions and go, ooh, well, why are they in that state? But it also helps from the standpoint that if I'm in the conversation and I go, oh God, Jason won't really look at me. And he seems to always be looking off screen with whatever he's doing. But I saw on his little note that said, I'm really distracted today. I'm not going to take it personal. Why? Because I know his state. And that's the other part that's really hard. So another kind of example again, where we start how to make it easy, acknowledge emotions. We got ready to take a big drive back and we were going to go through New York traffic. So I was like driving through New York and everybody knows that's like bumper to bumper and a little scary. I've been in enough car accidents that if enough brakes are touched, my neurochemical system is like fight or flight, like I want out of that car. And I knew I hadn't slept. So I got into that situation and I told my husband, look, I'm either going to try to fall asleep a little on the drive, which I don't usually do. I keep him company. And I said, when we get into the cities, I'm going to try really hard not to get agitated, but just don't take it personal if I do, because it's not your driving. It doesn't mean that I don't trust your driving. I just know I'm going to trigger easier. And so acknowledging your emotion, even with others, like if you go into a situation, say, hey, look, I just want to let you know, I've had a lot of things on my mind or whatever. It helps the other person understand where you're coming from so that they don't make up stories as to what they're interpreting, right? Because I know I had conversations with my husband. He goes, yeah, every time you do that, I think you don't trust me. And I was like, no, it has nothing to do. I know we've never been in an accident. It is not about that. So acknowledge. Create the safe place to connect. And this is true in groups, especially where sharing or information has to go on. Or you can put ground rules down and say, we're going to respect each other. We're going to listen to what other people say. We're going to give everybody a chance to talk. And sometimes this is really important when you have a new group starting. And sometimes it's good to go back and revisit. I did work with the capital projects team at ASU. And I remember when I first met with the head guy, he goes, I don't know why we're having you come in because I don't believe in any of this psychological babble stuff. Woo, great to know. Thanks for being honest. And I talked with everybody. And what I really got a sense was, one, they knew that when they made a mistake in a decision, it cost the university a lot of money and it made them feel guilty. The second thing that I discovered from talking to everybody was there was a high level of distrust in how they went about making decisions and believing that a person was going to follow through on commitment. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take, and I spent an hour just talking about how to set up ground rules, what they were going to do in terms of how they respected each other and were going to communicate. And I went through what we're going through today to help them set that up. After that first hour, they were having conversations at a level that they had not had at all. And I remember trying to stop him at one point to write something down. And the guy goes, oh, don't stop him. Don't, Mr. I don't believe in psychology. This is the best conversation we ever had. And I'm like, I wasn't meaning to stop. I'm just trying to keep up on the notes because I'm going to let everybody know what you talked about. So safe place, whatever that takes for you to do, important. Being willing to take risks in small moments. And I think that's the other thing. We don't just open ourselves wide up and say, hey, I'm going to trust you. We build trust. You know, it's like if I'm going to be a manager for the first time and I've got an employee that I've never done anything with, I don't want to set them out there and do something and 2 weeks later realize that they failed. Like, oh, I'm just going to trust you to get it done. No, I'm going to go, hey, let me give it to you. Let you work on it. I don't want to micromanage, but why don't you at least check in with me in a couple of days or a week, depending on the size of the project, and just let me know how it's going. Instead of me going, and are you here yet? Are you there yet? Which is more micromanaging. I'm leaving that window for them to explore with it and then come back to me, but I'm putting it in the time frame in a small thing so that then when they come back, we can start to build the trust around what it's going to take to get that project done. I'll understand more of their capabilities. They'll understand more what they can get from me. And we start to build the communication to build that relationship. Sometimes we have to ask people what they need. And this is hard. Why? Because sometimes people don't know what they need because they haven't thought about it. I mean, I can think to times where I can go, oh God, I really don't want that. But I can't go, well, this is what I'd rather have. And so sometimes asking people for what they need will actually take them out of one state, put them in another and go, oh God, well, what do I really need? They may be complaining. They may be saying that there's this and this and this isn't right. My daughter was notorious for it. And she would say no to everything I said. And I said, okay, well, you got to come to me with two options. I'm not giving you anything until you give me options. Right. And so it puts them into a state of not just seeing the problem for everything that's wrong, but then looking into that solution. So ask for people what they need. And this other part is really to ask for the commitment to what they're willing to contribute by when. This one, I think, is the one that gets us into trouble. So I may have a relationship with one person and, hey, yeah, you're going to get to that. Awesome. Cool. And I'll leave it because I know that they're a hard worker and they're going to turn around and they're going to get back to me. Well, in my head, I might be going, oh, they're going to get back to me by next week. And maybe if I've worked with them, I know they're going to do that. But if I'm working with someone, they say, yeah, okay, we'll get that done. And in my head, I'm thinking, I need that in 2 days. And in their head, they're thinking a week. We're going to create distrust. Why? Because we didn't communicate down to what the commitment was and by when. And hands down, I used to teach small group communication and I go, you guys are in the honeymoon phase right now. Everybody's talked and everybody wants an A and everything's great. And I said, the first time you have an assignment due and somebody turns in their paper late, we're going to start negotiating new rules. And it's like that. Well, I told them to get it in. And I wanted it by 6. They didn't turn it in until 1 o'clock. And I'll get the email from the person at 1 o'clock going, nobody got me the information until. I'm like, commitment, time, what we're doing. So now, next section is the neuro component of this. And what I like to do is have you actually type in here. Some of you have seen this before, so you can ask a question. You want information. I just went through an updated training on this. It was really fascinating. What pops out to you on here that you go, ooh, what is that about? Anything.
Pam, I think always when I see this, what I would makes me stop for a second is the wait and see, because I struggle with that. I'm very much emotion reaction. So I have to remind myself of that wait and see, like, what is this really telling me part?
Okay. Anybody else? There's a lot on here. Some people just like the colors. And that's okay. Okay. I love it. As I'm watching, everybody's looking. I can see eyes moving all over their screen to the different parts of it. And I like to do that because everybody explores information in different ways, just like we explore the nonverbals of other people in different ways. And so I want you to get a feel of it. And then as I start to go through, then it's going to start tying things together a little bit for you. So a couple things on this to note, and a lot of people look at, what is that? The heart brain and the gut brain. And I'm like, the heart's not a brain, the gut's not a brain. Why is that on there? Well, we actually, according to polyvagal theory, we have natural electrical wiring going throughout our body, just like electrical wiring in a house, right? We also have neurochemical transmission throughout our body, kind of like the plumbing in a house. So when we think about our brain and how it functions and how our body functions, our automatic response system comes from the bottom up. So our heart has more connections, obviously, all across the body because of the veins than the brain. The brain gets everything through the stem. Our gut also has a lot of connections throughout the body. And if you think about heart and gut, center of our body, the brain's the most resonant, or the heart is the most resonant part of the body. It can pick up vibration up to 30 feet away. It's getting signals. And so when we go into a situation and we get that feeling in our gut and it starts to tighten or we feel a little sick, the gut is sending the signals to the brain to go into arousal stress mode. And it's not that logically we've thought of anything, right? The gut went up and it's like all of a sudden we're feeling things and we don't know quite why we're feeling it or whatever. And it can kick in the automatic nervous system because it goes through this primitive part of the brain, which is back in the brainstem, and then it hits the limbic system where we have a little bit more response, even emotion, limbic and emotion is back here. As the same time that a signal is being sent more to the frontal cortex, which is where we can contemplate and think about things. So when you start thinking about trust, we can be triggered into a distrust response just by the information and things that we receive in our environment, and our brain hasn't even said, distrust this person. Now, here's what I used to love teaching in interpersonal communication. We get to the dating part of it. And I would say, did you know that when you walk into a situation within less than 6 seconds, you will cue in on people that you would be willing to date and people that you're not willing to date? And people go, what? Yeah, why? And they did the study. People will base trust or distrust of other people just off of their look, and will often be attracted to people who look like somebody they know that they trust. I was like, yeah, no. And then I went home and I was like, oh my God, the profile of my husband looks just like, yeah. And so we have this element of trust, distrust that just comes from our innate response to a situation or a person who may look. So we may trust somebody just because they look like somebody we know that we trusted before. We may distrust somebody just because they look like somebody that we distrusted. So now think about this. You're going out, you meet a couple people, you're talking to them, and somebody goes, oh my God, you remind me of my old boyfriend. I would never trust you in a million years, or my old girlfriend. And you're like, why are they responding to me like this? But we will pick up on those senses of distrust from them and then start responding with distrust back. And yet we could meet up 2 weeks later and finally, for some reason, get into a deeper conversation and realize that initial reaction has nothing to do with how we really actually feel about each other. So there's part of this is just innate. Now, When we're in a new situation, we're more in a resistor skeptical. We're kind of like stepping into the situation going, do I feel like trust? We're in protect mode, right? As we start communicating, okay, now we move into that kind of wait and see. I'm going to kind of play the field a little bit. I'm going to find out what's going on. And when we get into a deep conversation with someone where I potentially ask you questions that really help you unpack what you're thinking and feeling about something, we actually will start having our brain waves start to wire together. Our heart might actually start wiring together. They say really great couples who stay together actually start having their heart beat in the same tempo when they come together. And I was like, I wonder if that's really true, because I was thinking about times where I might be mellow and say my husband had just finished a workout. The funny part is if they have just finished a workout and they're in a higher state, sometimes it's not the best time to connect, because we really can't connect because they're still going at 100 miles an hour and we're not at that level. Yet if both of us worked out and we're both at 100 miles an hour, we relate to each other better. So it's interesting to note those little things. All right. So primitive brain is survival mode, fight, flight, freeze. It's triggered. If we're in a conversation with someone and somebody says something that might be like something else that somebody else has said that we don't trust, it automatically can trigger a sense of distrust in us. And it kicks in cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And it will start telling our body it's not safe. We feel it in our gut. We might feel it other ways. Logic hasn't kicked in. So what we have to do then in this wait see period, as Taylor said, is go, why am I sensing that? Why am I feeling that? And get curious about it. And then ask questions to unpack so that we can now move past the distrust to opening ourselves up to conversation to find out maybe even within ourselves what's triggered. Or if we observe something about somebody else, it's like, hey, I really get the sense that you're frustrated. Are you frustrated at me? I'm opening it up. Maybe I don't want to hear it. Yeah, I'm really pissed off at you. But at the same token, the person might go, God, no, I just came back from this other meeting and I'm just so frustrated, right? But if we don't do that, we're going to pick up the elements of whatever it is and then take it at us, and then we're going to respond. And so we have to feel what are our triggers, what's triggering it. Oh, the other person kind of had a short conversation with me, or they ask about it. And then we can move from this arousal state into a connected state. And we will start triggering other, I want to say, endorphins. And this is really amazing to do in a room of people where I get opening conversations and I will have two people chit chat about some topic. And then they go chit chat with somebody else about a topic and chit chat with somebody else about a topic. And pretty soon the whole room is a buzz and everything's really positive. You can take it down the negative path too by saying, okay, now get together, instead of talking about some positive thing, talk about the worst thing you had this last week. And pretty soon the whole room is filled with negativity. And so emotion is contagious. And so the whole feeling of trust and distrust can be contagious as well, especially on teams. So other part of this to really remember for yourselves is the arousal hormones can take up to 12 hours to get out of our body, while the positive hormones only lasts for about 3. So even John Gottman in his work on this said, you need to have 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction to keep a positive state in the relationship. And I said, well, that's just a neurochemical like equation. I have to create positive vibes in order to stay positive. And this is why it's so hard sometimes for couples that have went down a bad path to move into the right path, because the mere presence of a person that you've had an argument with that you have not resolved can trigger the negative hormones with them not even doing anything. And so arousal and stress is long, it can last 12 hours, but if you ruminate about the problem, it can last 24 hours, right? Have to be aware of it. This is also, again, important to be aware of, because it doesn't matter what triggers the adrenaline, okay? You get the buildup of adrenaline and it's going to affect your behavior and how you respond. So the example coming back this weekend, I've been in a couple accidents. So high traffic is pretty anxious for me, even if I'm not driving. But sometimes being the passenger, you have a stop distance. It's different than, the other person, and but you get, anyway. So I can get aroused. Well, I knew going into the trip back home, I hadn't had enough sleep, and I knew we were going to go into traffic. So for me, I just told my husband, I said, look, it's one of those days, haven't had sleep. We're going to hit New York traffic. I'm going to do my best, but don't take anything personal, because I absolutely trust your driving, right? Because I can remember back when we used to commute Mesa to ASU, and if I was like, as he's going through traffic to get off, it could trigger an argument between us. And it wasn't about us. It was about my state and my thing and him taking it personal. And so having that conversation around the state, saying what was going on, we got to the traffic and I just said, yep, I'm triggered. We've had 3 almost like type things. And I said, I'm going to try really hard. And he goes, well, just calm down. And I was like, worst thing you can tell a person who's excited, because it doesn't work. I said, I will do my best. Just know it's not you. And we could talk through it. And so instead of creating an argument, we were able to work through that. So really important, again, to notice those. So here's another thing.
Pam, I have a quick question for you. So kind of back to that previous slide, you were talking about the balance of the negative and positive experiences. And you may have kind of already answered this by setting expectations, but how do you deal with, like, for example, I tend to be a very sensitive person. So even like a look, like it doesn't even have to be an interaction really. It's just like we pass each other in the hallway and they look frustrated or they look angry. They didn't say anything, do anything. And I'm working on my own, personal responses to that. And how do I not take things personally? But at what point do you decide that, like, okay, I'm getting too many of these negative looks and not enough of this positive, like, hi, how are you interaction? Is there, like, do you have any recommendations for when the balance is kind of off that way?
I will say that one thing I have to be aware of is my own state. So if I feel like everybody's looking at me negative, I sometimes step back and go, ooh, am I in the right place first? Because if I am drained, if I'm slightly down, I know that I can interpret the actions of others as being more negative. And so then I have to consciously tell myself, calm down, you're not in the right space. And I may try to connect with somebody who I know I can trust to have a good conversation with. And I know during COVID, I purposely started setting conversations with people in my day of somebody that I knew either early in the morning or late evening so that I could talk to friends to put myself into a better state. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing is if it's a particular coworker and it's not just a one and done, like you went by them and they were there and you go, God, no, this has happened once. This has happened. I've noticed this now over the course of time. Because it's easier to go, okay, I just probably misinterpreted and blow it off. But if you've gotten it a couple times, that's where you need to do the check-in and go, hey, I've passed you a couple times in the past week and you just seem like you're really frustrated. I just want to check in and see if you're okay or if everything's okay between us. Like, is everything okay? And then you can put that to ease because you'll know. They'll go, oh God, no, every time I see you, I'm just getting done with this other class or this other meeting or whatever. And I'm just fried. So sometimes I don't even notice I've passed you. And you'll be going, oh, okay, great. That's good. Or you get to the heart of whatever the issue is. Oh yeah, remember Taylor, when we met like 3 weeks ago, we have never resolved that problem. Well, there we go. Now we know what it is. So yeah, easy to note that our own state sometimes affects our interpretation. So be aware of that. And then if you see it repeatedly, step in, because I don't want to do it for everybody because you pass way too many people at ASU all the time. Yeah. So again, if and again, you've got complete strangers, don't worry about it. If it's somebody that you work with constantly and you see it a couple times, awesome. But yeah, also kind of check in with yourself and go, what else? So example, if you're in a near car accident on the way to work, or you're really in bad traffic, stop and go, and you're agitated when you get out of your car, it's very easy to carry that adrenaline rush because it's in the body. The body doesn't know the difference between an adrenaline rush caused from a distrust, a gun going off, a car accident, or running several miles. Same physiology, but now it's a matter of how do we label it and how are we responding to it and understanding. So if I know that that's the state I'm in and I know where that came from, in my head, I need to go, wow, I need to make sure that I take some space and let myself come back down. And they say the best thing is either to like do a couple jumping jacks, walk around the car physically and go, I'm safe now, I'm not in my car, and then go into work. Like somehow do I'm done with this, or you just get done with a really bad meeting. you need to go take a walk around the building a couple times before you see the next person, because I need to come out of that state. Otherwise, I'm going to carry that state to the next one, and that will affect what happened. So neurochemically, let your body come down. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. This is the other thing where, again, it's trying to understand emotions. Trust is about emotion. And so here's this chart of where people feel different emotions. So this is that other thing to understand. Like if parts of my body are starting to go cold, sadness, neutral, going into depression, even shame, envy, like parts of me are shutting down, right? Look at happiness, total feeling all over the body. Love, very centered up top. Anger, also up top, but note it's kind of like from here up and also in the hands. I want to do something. So we all experience it differently. I put this other one over here. This is work by Dr. Aikman on emotion and reading emotion. And so you see there's all these emotions and there's subtleties. So it moves from happiness to being neutral and everything in between. Now, obviously we can tell surprise. These are the base emotions he said up top. Happy, we can see the lines in the face a certain way. Sad, things start to droop. Afraid, the eyes open. But what's the difference between afraid and surprised? It's very subtle, right? Like both of them, the eyes are open, and one, the eyebrow might be open. So this is how easy it is to misread people. Like, and I used to teach this, so I can look at it and go, yeah. We just pick up on it suddenly and go, ooh, like disgust down here, right? When somebody's starting to snarl, like that one is like, if we see that look at us, we're like, ooh, they don't like us, right? So those are things just, again, to be aware. We feel it different. We see it different. When we see something in others, don't label and go, oh, you're angry or you're an angry person. No, it's like, wow, you seem frustrated. Explain to me why. I know there's nothing worse for me than to be put in a box and told what I am. Because then I want to what? Defend myself, break out of that box, which then probably creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. No, I'm not angry. You sure sound it. No, I'm defensive now. So, key to transformation on this side. Ask questions to connect with others. When you know something's going on, ask about their state, connect with them, ask open-ended questions, not closed. You're trying to be curious. And then listen. Hard part, like we need to actually listen to them. Then we need to also ask questions about what they need and that they might not have an answer to, but we need to get them to move into that direction. And then we need to listen again. The best therapists, the best leaders actually don't do a lot of talking. They find ways to get the people to do the talking themselves. And it's really amazing that sometimes when we have a really good friend, we can talk through a problem because it's creating connections in our brains in different ways than when we just think in our head by ourselves. That helps. And asking questions can help people create connections. Then we have to act and demonstrate on what we do here. So if somebody says, hey, I really want more of this, or I want less of that, we need to try to work on that. And the same is true also that when we see other people, if we've asked them to do something or not do something, when we recognize that they're following it, go, hey, I just want you to know, I really appreciate it. I could tell you we're working on that last thing. It was really good. Felt good to me. Those are creating positive connecting endorphins. When we recognize it and then we act on it, those completing things together, creating things together, and having success together leads to those positive emotions. So we can actually have a negative turn into a positive as we start to see the progress move in another direction. All right. Distrust. What are those absolute trigger points that sometimes we don't think about, but how can we vocalize what causes the innate part of us? And this is the SCARF model. This is taken from David Rock and the Neuro Institute. And I thought this was a great slide, and I can make this available to Abby so that she can distribute it to you guys as well. If we are triggered in any of these other areas, okay, of SCARF, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, it will trigger our automatic nervous system and give us an element of distrust. Okay, so think about this for yourself. Status. I want to know that I'm valuable. I want to know that in a relationship, I'm usually of equal value to somebody else. But now let's think about that. We will take somebody who has a title that's higher than ours and sometimes esteem them as being better than we are, right? Very common. And yet status is also difficult because maybe that person doesn't care about their title. They don't worry about those things. They just think of themselves as a human being. But now we have put something on them that we feel like they have to live up to because we see them as having status. And so we treat them different, which then may cause them to treat us different. Status also plays in, I want to say, from the politics side. Is that person on an equal plane? Do I feel safe working with them? Or do I feel like they've got higher status than they're going to hold? Like we start playing games with ourselves when status comes into question, when we don't feel like we're equals. So note over here, I also have a second piece that says active threat. So if somebody tells me to do something without asking, instead of giving advice or asking permission to give advice, that can be a threat to status. Like, who are they to tell me? That's an example of a threat. Or being left out. You're on a committee and there's 5 people and you note that 3 of the people always get together and they leave 2 people out. Well, wasn't I important enough to tell that information to? Threat to status. Okay, so examples of it. So then I also put over here positive things. What activates reward? Noticing work when done or when improvements, as I mentioned before, allowing people to provide feedback on their own work. So like if you're a manager and you have to talk to somebody, it's like, hey, well, you tell me what was good or bad about that project first before I go in and go, you know what? That project didn't meet standards. But they probably already know it. So find out what they know and what they struggled with, because then you're going to know how to provide them with the best information or coaching to move forward. And in this one, from conversational intelligence, she would say that when you're in the tell mode or yell mode is a threat to status. Okay. Other thing that we like to have in our relationships is certainty. We want to know what's going to happen. We like to be kept informed. We like to know where we stand. So if anything happens where we start to question, like, well, I thought it was important enough to kind of get that stuff, or the rules change, like you're in a relationship and you're doing certain things and all of a sudden they do something different. You're like, well, wait a minute. I thought we agreed to do this and now you're doing that. Something has changed in that. And so that prospect of change can create issues. Think about when COVID first hit and everybody went home. It's like, what am I doing? I don't know. Like I'm in a state of anxiety because of my uncertainty. And it has nothing to do with everybody else, but then it put us all on guard, which then put us on guard in how we treated everybody else. And so then we had this ricocheting until we figured out how to check in with people more. That's why they said, hey, best thing to do is just check in. Let's take a few minutes. Let's talk about stuff, because we're trying to create that level of certainty and predictability. Autonomy. We like to know that we have control over what's going on in our environment. When that's taken away, it's a threat. Relatedness. Again, I mentioned that we like people that look like other people that we know. We also like to know that we have a sense of vibe of belonging, that we fit in, that there's a part of that. Relatedness is important, but it's also interesting that if somebody has to change who they are to fit into the relatedness and they do that too long and they lose themselves, that can lead to distrust and people won't even know why they feel compromised. So relatedness is important. We need it to a certain degree, but then again, autonomy, we also need to know that we can be ourselves. And then fairness in terms of treating people with respect and value, that we all get a voice, that we're part of things. And so anytime there's discrimination or someone feels like they've been left out, again, if something's not fair, these are all triggers. So here's a couple things. I'm trying to keep track of time here. So move ahead. All right. So takeaway. What leads to distrust? These are things that you can do to help build trust back. And in Brené's work, she talks about the 7 elements of trust. What do? We have to start setting down boundaries. So boundaries are making clear what's important to me. This is one that I had a conversation about this with somebody this morning. I thought I understood boundaries, and I will tell you, sometimes this one, I could send another whole slide deck on these alone. Sometimes it's that I need to value myself more, and I won't say no, right? Boundary is that I need to say no more often, or let's wait and see, or something, because somebody will go, hey, Abby, can you do this? Yeah, sure, I'll do that, no problem. And then in my head, I'm like, why did I just commit to that? Like, it's going to take me 10 hours and blah. A boundary is to say, hey, Abby, let me think about that. Let me work through it. A boundary may be that you need amount of time to do something. A boundary might be that you want to be addressed in a certain way, or that maybe somebody's done something that was disrespectful and they may not know it. And then a boundary would be to say, hey, last time we were together, you did XYZ. I just want to know that was really disrespectful. I'd like to see this instead. But making clear not just what you don't want, but what you want. If you can tell people what you want, it makes it easier for them to do it. And for females, I want to say we're really bad. We hint at it without stating it exactly. Reliability.
With boundaries, I just wanted to say, I think it's funny in the sense of, I am one that I've been trying to work really hard on my personal boundaries, both in my personal life and at work. And I just think it's funny, and maybe you have some type of input on, I'll be the first person to stick up for any of my friends or colleagues and be like, yes, you need those boundaries, stick to those boundaries, stay firm to those boundaries, but I'm the first one to fold when it comes to my boundaries.
Really
I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm seeing other people kind of laugh and nod their heads. So
and what's interesting is boundaries can, for some people, it's around relationships because they're people, right? That's where boundaries get broken easier. For some people, it's in the process of how a job is carried out or the timing of the job or those type of things. And that can be a boundary. And others, it can get into more of a systems type thing of order of how things need to happen, or the hierarchy, or like we're working toward the big picture and here's the sense of timing, what it is. So it's interesting for different people, those can be different, for some, but we don't talk about it. And when we don't talk about it, it's like, I have no idea that I just made you upset because you have a systems thing that's important. Whereas for me, it's the people side that's important. So definitely. Reliability. This is doing what you say you're going to do and not overpromising. There are some people, they just want to do it. And so here's the kicker. We as people will let people overpromise and sit back and go, yeah, they're not going to get that done. I know it. And then let them fail, which is okay. Because I know as parenting, you're supposed to let your kids fail a little bit so that you can work with them on it. And they understand that sense. But at the same token, if I know someone's coming in and it's just unrealistic for what they're going to do, I need to go down, hey, it's really great that you want to do that. Let's sit down and talk about the realistic part of it. Let's commit to something else instead to make sure that we get this stepping stone right. Okay. There's a difference between all out. Yeah. And then the other part on reliability is for us to know that when we make a commitment, how do we follow up when we know we're not going to make it? Do we just wait up to that day and go, oh yeah, Taylor, I promised that thing for you and I didn't get it done? Or do we go, Taylor, I know I promised that thing, it's going to be due in a couple of days. I don't think I'm gonna get it done on time. Is it going to be a big deal or can we have a couple of days? If I do that, that's really going to create trust between Taylor and I, because she knows that if something isn't going to happen, I'm going to go to her early instead of last minute, right? So reliability isn't just like meeting, but it's that, how do I continue to stay in check? Accountability is about owning mistakes. Now, I will say that somebody that just goes, sorry, yeah, sorry, we don't take that, right? But at the same token, accountability sometimes is when someone misinterpreted what you were saying, and then you let them know and they discovered that their thought was wrong. If they don't go, God, I'm sorry, there's a part of you that distrusts them, because it's like, hey, you're not willing to recognize that you were wrong, right? How many of us have missed we're just waiting for that, acknowledgement of something, and we don't get it. And it's like, but it's not a spoken, it's not like we would think of it, we feel that. So accountability is owning, apologizing, and making amends. And that's huge. And that's why Gottman in his work in relationships will say, it's not that couples don't fight. Happy couples fight as much as couples that struggle. The difference is happy couples find a way to get to the end. The other ones don't. The vault. This is knowing what to share and what you can't share. And the vault is really difficult sometimes because it's the meeting after the meeting where two people go, oh God, did you hear so-and-so in the meeting? Like, could you believe that? Or you hear about something going on in another department. Like, we will share information because indirectly we feel like that's a connection. But if we're gaining connection over somebody else's demise, it's not a true connection. And so vault's really important that we keep our confidence when we have to. All of us do need to have that out, what she would call the square squad. So sometimes things happens at work and we need to go talk it out with somebody. Great, talk it out with somebody outside of the work scenario so that we don't break the vault and have somebody slip and then what you said gets out to so-and-so, but find the right place to talk it out. And integrity. Integrity is, as she says, doing what's right. In doing the Atlas of the Heart, really discovered that integrity is living into what we value. And when we don't do something that we know is important to us, we go into a state of dissonance, which creates distrust. It creates a self-distrust. So if I really pride myself in something, like I'm going to respond to my emails within 24 hours and I don't respond and I can't get to it, I'm going to start feeling agitated because I haven't done something that's on my list in my mind of what I should be able to do, right? So when I'm in that agitated state now, I may either notice when other people don't do the same email, like I'm not the only one. Look, they're not getting it done either. We will find the fault that is the same as what our fault is. But at the same token, I may compromise myself and go, oh, what really wasn't important. I'll create excuses, right? Or no, you know what? I'm going to blame somebody. That's because so-and-so came in and interrupted me, right? And so now we're just, this integrity part is to know when we're not operating in our values and doing what we need to do to get back in check with that. Non-judgment. Sorry, this one is hard. And it's the one for me that really lets me know that somewhere along the line, there's distrust. If I start making comments that come out as judgment, it's like, ooh, I need to back up and get curious. Where have I been wrong that I'm starting to move into that state? And our brain does it naturally because we're looking for what's wrong, bad, and awful because of our innate desire for, if you will, fight, flight, freeze. We're moving into that. So we be aware of non-judgment. If we're moving into judgment, get curious and find out what it is, ask questions around it. And generosity. This is where we want to extend generous interpretations to others. Now, Brené puts this into what she calls the big. Boundaries, integrity, generosity. So they're kind of like the bookends and integrity in the middle. And it's what boundaries do I need to set and follow so that I can live within my integrity and create generosity when it comes to interpreting your actions. And so what happens is we're almost like in the middle of this seesaw. So think about, okay, one of my boundaries is I know I need 24 hours to make a decision, right? So I put down the boundary, I need 24 hours. And Nancy comes to me and says, hey, I need this decision and I'm sorry, but I need it in less than an hour. Well, if I'm the manager and I know she needs the decision, I might say, sure, okay, I'll look at the stuff and try to give her a decision. And then I take the information home and I go, I can't do that. I totally messed up, Nancy, can't do that. And now I've compromised myself, right? I'm now operating out of my own integrity because I made a decision that I don't feel good about. And now I'm going to be frustrated with Nancy and I may blame her because she got it to me late. So how do we fix this? The boundary would be, hey, I need 24 hours, right? And so that gives me time to process and be able to operate and know that I'm going to give you the best decision and what we can do so I can be generous. But then there's the reality of what happens at times. You don't get information till the last minute, so you run into the last minute and now I've got to get this decision in the last minute. So how do I operate my boundary knowing that I've put a rule down for people and that rule might be broken? How do I make that mend with my integrity? So that's where you have to get together and talk and say, hey, you know what, Nancy, you've come into me the past 3 times and it just seems like you always come in late. And I can appreciate that you don't get your information till later, but here's a way maybe that will help me. I still need kind of that 24-hour rule. If you know there's an important decision coming down the pike, but you're waiting on one piece of information, come to me with that information ahead of time. Give me everything you have. And when you get that last bit of information, then give it to me because now I'm not making the decision over all of it. I'm just waiting for that last piece to help me make that last final decision. And I'm aware that there's a decision being made. Again, how do we set the boundaries so that we can still stick to what's important and operate where we need to, but then also be generous to other people? and it's not easy. It's like this seesaw. And so think about it. There's times that I might come down with hard boundaries. Oh man, that happened. I'm going to put a boundary down. And I've actually, in teaching Dare to Lead, had people go, yeah, it's like boundaries sometimes feel like people slamming things at you. And I'm like, that's not their intent. So maybe need to work on softening that. But we have to move into that protect mode at times first, right? But then at the same token, then when we start communicating those, we're going to get in more of a balance with people that we know that, okay, in this case, I need to be generous, and I can be generous. I can still operate in my values. It's when we're in the extreme of the seesaw. And I can remember my daughter at one time at a soccer event, she climbs on with this gal and they're doing the seesaw thing. And the gal, when my daughter's at top, jumps off the seesaw and she crashes to the ground and crunched her back pretty bad. It was really bad. My daughter never got on a seesaw again because she never trusted anybody. So, but think about that. That's the same kind of feeling we get when somebody isn't operating, like they jump off, we lose trust, like, ooh, it sends us flying. So the better we are at setting the boundaries and the things that we need, helps us operate in our integrity, but also allows us to be generous and to ask the right questions and work with people. And that's, trust isn't like it's all in or all out. Trust is fluid. I mean, even in relationships that I would say, I've had a friend that I would say we're good. Like we could be apart for 8 months, get together, and it feels like we were together yesterday, right? But we've still had times where something wasn't right. But it's in talking through that we keep the relationship and the balance that we need. So boundaries, integrity, and generosity. Here's an example of what some of the boundaries can look like. Don't be afraid to say no. Accept other people setting boundaries. Be careful of oversharing information. So I can say, hey, I would prefer that our meetings end by a certain time. I don't need to explain that I have to go pick up a kid or I need to do X. I just need to say, here's the boundary. I can keep it simple. Communicate what you need. Reflect on your own intentions about why you're trying to do it. Again, agree to disagree sometimes. The other side is really interesting because it puts into I statement, which is really important. I will stand up for myself, voice my opinion with confidence. I will take care of myself first. So these are the things that we are stating as a boundary that I need to do for myself, again, to operate in my integrity. So just a couple examples of things to look at. All right. Moving on here. So the key transformation, things you can consciously do to build trust, set clear boundaries. Okay. And that means to define what is it that I need and go there. Do what you say you're going to do. Or talk to people. If they said they were going to do something and they didn't, confront them on that. That's the accountability piece. So have them say, hey, this is what's going on. And then you set the boundary down. So next time, accountability, when we get into this, I need you to come to me earlier, right? So set clear boundaries, do what you say you're going to do and apologize on your side. And if someone else has done something and they haven't apologized, it's not that you can sincerely ask for an apology if they don't want to give it, but you can let them know that maybe you were looking for one. Be accountable. Also work to do the amends side. And this is the big part, I think, on this one, is that when you know something hasn't gone right, when you settle down, the trauma's over, go back and say, hey, last time we were in this boat, it didn't end right. What can we do different? How can we fix this? What else can we do to make it better for next time? And that will help reduce the amount of, again, adrenaline that comes up. Protect the vault. So know who you're talking to. And if you've got someone that's dishing on stuff, hard, but if you've got words set in place and say, hey, you know what? I haven't had that experience with that person. Or, I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about this right now. If you had trouble in the meeting, I think you should bring it up next time. Just be aware of when the vault's broken or with certain people, and just, you don't have to put them down on the process, but you can just say, hey, I don't want to take part in the conversation. Okay. And integrity, act to your values, know them. If you've never done a value sort, find a way to get in one of my Dare to Lead classes. We'll do it. I find people go, oh, I really thought I knew what my values are. And they go through the value sort and realize that they might've shifted a little. Or they were so not aware of how much this one thing was important to them because it defined it. And 75% of the people in my class have never done a value sort. So something to kind of think through. And don't be judgmental. Hard, but again, just be aware of when you're judgmental and where is that judgment coming from. because sometimes that helps you understand why you're being defensive or where you are feeling your angst about what that is. And usually if there's a judgment involved, there's some kind of rule or something that's been broken. And if you can figure out what that is and decide what you would want instead, then it becomes a boundary, a discussion about what we want instead. The other thing is to be generous about our assumptions and ask questions. I always at this point, I might have that first initial oof, and then I'll go, okay, no, I have no idea what that person's going through. They may be doing whatever they're doing, and I come up with some kind of generous assumption. Like being cut off by somebody in a car. And it happened, it's like when somebody else cuts you off, you're like, oh, they're an idiot. But when you cut somebody off because you just didn't realize you had to get on that exit, like it's a different story. And so how can we literally work with the stories in our head, because it will change the physiology, it will change the neurochemicals that happen if we try to be generous. And I didn't hand this out, but I can hand it to people. This was a part of the conversational intelligent piece, and it was called the catalyst of trust. But the part I want to point out here, and I know I'm running over time, there are things that we do in conversations that build trust. And there are things that we do that distract from trust. So we can be trying to have a trusting conversation, but then do something that triggers the opposite. And so this was something that she came up with that you can take with any relationship and go, am I doing this? And just mark out on the scale. Are you truthful about what's on your mind? Do you define a plan for mutual success? If you do these things, great, you can check on it. But then you can go down here and you can say, oh God, do I pretend like I'm listening sometimes? Do I do this? And it's like all of a sudden, if you fold that over and then you open it and look at it, up here in green are the positive things that we do. And down here are things that are potentially negative. And so if I'm doing something and I'm triggering distrust at the same time I'm doing trust, things that I think I'm doing the right thing, the mutual outcome is going to be possibly distrust. And so the better we get at understanding what we do and what we don't do that helps communicate trust, we can get to more trusting relationships. Not always easy, but I would say this is a journey, not a destination. I would suggest reading like the Atlas of the Heart, Understanding Emotions Better, or Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett, anything that helps you understand emotions a little bit better. Diving into understanding boundaries, because anytime we understand our emotions and we understand what it is that's breaking trust, when we can break it down by braving, when we can break down the elements of it, then we can talk about it. We can get specific about it, and we can start making the changes to the specific behavior or the way things are said that will help us to start building our trust back with somebody. But it takes unpacking, it takes time, and it takes being really honest with ourselves. Any questions? I am willing to stay on.
I do just want to say thank you again, Pam, for joining us today. I don't know about the rest of the group, but I know I definitely was able to reflect on, like you had mentioned at the beginning, personal relationships, but of course also at the working level too. And I think one thing that I've brought away from this is the fact, again, that I had said I need to be better about my own personal boundaries, but also just reaching out and making the initial conversation with my working learners, or PMR student employees that I supervise, to make sure that I have a clear understanding of their boundaries too. And like you'd said, with like the real reliability piece, I don't need to micromanage them, but making sure that they understand what my boundaries are, and being able to feel like that they can communicate to me that, hey, Abby, I know that this project was supposed to be done on Friday. I'm not going to get it done because, like you said, I'd rather know that ahead of time than at the end. So definitely something I got from that. And I see too in the chat, good conversation, Jason. I would definitely agree with you. The disparity in your internal emotional state versus what you're displaying on the outside. So awesome. Thank you so much again, Pam.
Yeah, like I said, tip of the iceberg. Hope you get to join in. I'm doing a 2-hour workshop in CSW on the Atlas of the Heart, so I'll be unpacking more on that one. So definitely look that in if you're interested. It's, I think, on the Wednesday. So awesome. I'll get this to Abby so Abby can send it out to everybody, and the Catalyst thing as well, so you guys can have some take home and a little homework, so keep it going.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everybody,
Yep.
for
Take
joining
care.
us.
Thank you, everybody.